He grabbed her wrist so hard that her book fell to the ground, and his voice cut through the quiet morning like a blade. "Don't move. You match the profile. Hands where I can see them." The words came out sharp, certain, as if guilt was already written on her skin. For a moment, everything froze, and the air felt heavy, like old history rising again to take what it had always taken. She looked up at him, steady, unblinking. A woman who had seen too much injustice to mistake this for anything else. She was not running. She was not threatening anyone. She was just sitting on a bench, reading quietly. Yet, to these officers, that was enough. Before we continue, if you are watching this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support. Now! The moment stretched, and it was as if time had folded in on itself, carrying her back to being 10 years old on a cracked sidewalk, watching her father face down on the pavement while officers yelled orders he could not obey fast enough. She remembered the smell of sweat, the dust on his cheek, the sound he made when a boot pressed the back of his head. That memory lived under her ribs. And as Mitchell stood in front of her now, those same muscles tightened like they recognized the past coming home. Aisha Thompson, federal judge, 42 years old, graduate of Harvard Law, a woman who had sentenced cartel leaders, CEOs, and corrupt officials, said quietly, "You have the wrong person." She kept her voice calm because fear would give him reason to escalate. Mitchell didn't care. He repeated the accusation, louder, as if volume could make truth. Wanted trafficker, female, black, curly hair, 5'6", black jacket. That's you. Another officer. Kyle Benson stepped behind her, his breathing fast, eyes darting. He was the type who followed, the type who needed someone to tell him who to be. Aisha stood, slow, deliberate, careful not to make any sudden movement that could be misread. "I am a federal judge," she said, and the words should have meant something. But Mitchell smirked. "Sure you are. They all say something. Even judges bleed." She heard him thinking it before he spoke it. She had seen that look in courtrooms, jails, and news footage. The moment someone in authority decided that a black person was a threat, not a person, a silhouette, a category, a risk. The space around them shifted as a few joggers slowed their pace. Sensing tension, Aisha understood crowds. She understood that witnesses mattered, so she took one step back, not away, but toward the open area where people could see. Mitchell misread it as resistance. He reached for her arm again. Instinct took over. Aisha moved, not to fight, but to breathe. She stepped out of his grip. He shouted. Benson lunged, and suddenly she was running, her feet pounding against the trail, her mind a storm of disbelief and memory. She wasn't running to escape. She was running to stay alive. Branches blurred. Voices echoed. Someone yelled to call the police, not knowing they already were the police. Mitchell was fast. Benson was faster. But fear is fuel, and dignity is a fire. Aisha pushed forward until the trail opened to a clearing where a group of college students gathered around a picnic table. She stopped there, not to hide, but to be seen. Mitchell tackled her from behind. The ground hit her hard. Pain shot up her arm. Someone screamed. Someone else started recording. Sarah Jenkins, a young white woman with a phone in trembling hands, captured the moment his knee pressed into Aisha's back, and his voice filled with something dark. "Stop resisting." She wasn't resisting. She was breathing. She was enduring. And she knew the world would see. Tom Nguyen, the cafe owner near the park entrance, saw the chase from a distance and felt something he had known since his family immigrated decades ago. That justice was not always given. Sometimes it had to be forced into the light. He turned his security cameras toward the path. He didn't know who she was. He just knew wrong when he saw it. Aisha's cheek pressed against damp earth for a flicker of a second. It was her father's cheek she remembered, his breath shaking, his voice saying her name with apology he didn't owe. She steadied her own breath now, because she had learned to stand where others had fallen. Benson cuffed her wrists, too tight, metal biting bone. Mitchell leaned close enough for her to smell coffee on his breath. "Even judges bleed," he said, and there it was, the past repeating itself, dressed in new uniforms, carrying new justifications, but still the same truth. People gathered, voices rose, some angry, some afraid, some confused. Sarah's hands shook, but she didn't stop recording. Tom stepped closer, quiet but unafraid. The siren arrived late, as sirens often do, after the damage had already been done. They hoisted her up and walked her toward the cruiser. The metal door reflected her face back at her. Calm. Controlled. But inside, something had shifted. Something awakening. Mitchell opened the back door. Aisha paused just long enough for him to meet her eyes. "This isn't over," she said. "Not a threat. A promise. A truth. A beginning. And somewhere, like a shadow stretching across time." History nodded in recognition. He did not speak to her on the drive. The cruiser hummed along the wet road, the wiper blades dragging slowly across the windshield. Aisha sat in the back seat, hands cuffed in front of her now, wrists sore, shoulders tight, breathing steady because steadiness was all she had left. Mitchell stared ahead as if the road owed him answers. Benson sat beside him, tapping his knee. Restless, unsure. A man who followed orders even when they tasted wrong in his mouth. The silence was not peaceful. It was the kind that builds right before something breaks. They pulled into Seattle PD headquarters, a building of concrete, metal doors, and buzzing lights that always seemed just a little too bright. Aisha stepped out with dignity, even in cuffs, even with her hair mussed and her jacket dusted with dirt from the ground. She held her chin high because if she lowered it, even once, the city would swallow her whole, inside. The booking room smelled like disinfectant and something older, something tired. The officer behind the desk looked up, recognized Mitchell, and nodded without question. That was how it worked. One uniform vouched, and the world believed. "Name?" the clerk asked. Aisha answered calmly. "Judge Aisha Thompson, Federal District Court." He paused, confused, and turned toward Mitchell. Mitchell laughed under his breath, low, dismissive. "She's lying." The clerk didn't argue. He simply typed. Aisha watched her life be flattened into a form, reduced to a line of text, as though everything she had overcome meant nothing the moment someone else chose not to see it. They took her fingerprints. The machine beeped. They took her mugshot. The flash was harsh, unforgiving. They told her to look forward, not down, not away. She did, because she wanted every frame of that photograph to say, "I am not ashamed." Mitchell leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He looked at her like a man trying to convince himself that what he was doing was righteous. He needed her to be guilty so he would not have to face himself. That was the cruel truth of power. It did not require proof, only belief. And Mitchell believed, "Even judges bleed," he said again. Quieter, like a memory slipping out instead of a taunt. Aisha turned her head slightly, and so do cowards. He didn't respond, but Benson flinched, just barely. Someone called Mitchell away. He stepped into a side hallway and pulled out his body cam. He tapped through the footage, jaw tense. He found the part he wanted to erase, those 30 seconds where his voice said something no officer should say, something that could break a case wide open. His thumb hovered, then clicked. Delete. He thought it was gone. He did not know the camera still synced to the cloud. He did not know that the server had already logged the missing segment. He did not know the truth was already waiting for its moment. Meanwhile, Aisha sat at a metal table in a processing cell. Cold, plain, designed to strip a person down to their most vulnerable form. She could hear her father's voice in her mind. Hold your silence. Hold your center. They can take your time. They cannot take your mind. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. But she did feel the weight. And weights, even when carried with strength, still press. An officer approached. Phone call. She dialed one number. Elena answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, controlled, full of fire that came from loss. Where are you? Aisha spoke slowly, deliberately. Seattle PD. I was arrested. A long, dangerous silence. Then Elena said, I'm coming. Derek arrived too. He moved through the station like a man trying to hold back a storm. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply said, My wife is a federal judge. I want her released now. They ignored him. They always ignored men who spoke without volume. But Derek didn't come alone. Elena came with him, and Elena knew how to cut systems open. She asked for badge numbers. She wrote down names. She requested the precinct's watch commander. She did not ask. She demanded. Aisha was released 3 hours later, not because they admitted they were wrong, but because they had no reason to hold her, no evidence, no warrant, no justification that could survive even a weak court review. She walked out into the evening drizzle. The air felt heavier than when she went in. Derek wrapped his coat around her shoulders. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They drove home in silence. When they stepped into their high-rise apartment, the city lights spread across the window like stars pinned to glass. Aisha sat at the dining table. She placed her hands flat on the wood, and she exhaled, slowly. Elena stood across from her. We fight, she said. Aisha looked up. There was no hesitation. Yes, she said, we fight. That night, while Seattle slept, while Mitchell drank alone in his kitchen, while Benson stared at the ceiling wondering how much of himself he had lost today, while Sarah uploaded her video to social media with trembling fingers, while Tom transferred his cafe security footage to a hard drive. The world shifted. The video hit 2 million views by midnight, 8 million by dawn, 12 million by noon. Comment sections filled with disbelief and rage. News anchors argued meaning. Community leaders gathered. Mothers cried. Young people marched. Aisha sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and typed the first sentence of the civil rights lawsuit, and as she typed, her voice was steady. I am suing them, she said, and the entire department. Her father once told her that justice is slow, but it always comes for those who refuse to kneel. She was not kneeling. Not now. Not ever. They met in Elena's office the next morning, the rain tapping softly against the tall windows, the city waking slowly below. Aisha sat at the conference table, her posture straight, her eyes focused, but there was a heaviness in the air, a weight that came from being reminded of a truth she already knew too well. Sometimes, no matter how far you rise, the world still tries to drag you back to the ground where it first saw you. Elena spread out documents, reports, case files, and video transcripts like a surgeon laying out instruments. Her movements were precise, controlled, fueled not by anger, but by purpose. We need to show this wasn't an accident, Elena said. Not a misunderstanding, not an unfortunate resemblance. This was profiling, bias, abuse of authority. Aisha nodded once. We will show it, but we do it with facts, no theatrics. That was who she was. Even wounded, she remained the judge, even humiliated. She lived in discipline, and yet, inside, there was something else too, something rising, a fire made from years of silence. Dr. Marcus Lee entered then, carrying 2 folders thick with analysis. He did not come as a friend. He came as an expert. He placed the folders on the table and opened the first. This is the fingerprint comparison between Aisha and the suspect. He said, "They are not even close. Bone proportions, finger ridge density, wrist joint angles. Anyone trained could see this is not the same person." He paused, letting the weight of that truth settle. They chose to believe what they wanted to believe. Aisha listened, her face calm, but her heart tightened. She had seen cases like that from the bench, cases where the truth did not matter because the assumption had already been written. Outside, the video continued to spread. People watched as she was tackled, pinned, handcuffed, while she said nothing, while she did nothing but exist in the wrong body at the wrong moment before the wrong eyes. The city buzzed. Conversations whispered in grocery aisles, comments posted beneath news clips, radio hosts arguing blame and shame, and at the center of it, Aisha did what she always did. She worked, meanwhile. Reverend Olivia Grant stood in the pulpit of the community center, her voice steady, her presence like an anchor in a storm. "Our sister has been wronged," she said to rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors, elders, students, young parents with children on their laps. "And when one of us is wronged, all of us are called to stand." The choir hummed softly behind her, a sound like memory, like prayer, like grief turning into purpose. That evening, 500 people gathered outside the Seattle PD building. They did not riot, they did not scream, they stood, silent, a wall of witnesses refusing to be invisible. But pressure travels, and not only in one direction. Mitchell sat in his living room, the TV muted, the video playing on screen. His wife stood behind him, arms crossed, fear and disbelief in her eyes. "Ryan, why didn't you stop?" He didn't answer, because he didn't know. Or maybe he knew too well. Benson was worse off. He sat alone, a bottle half empty beside him, his breathing uneven. He had always wanted to be good. He had wanted the job to mean something, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped questioning who he was becoming, and now the mirror did not recognize him. Across the city, someone knocked on Sarah Jenkins's apartment door. She froze. Through the peephole, she saw Mitchell. His expression was polite, but there was a sharpness behind it. "We need to talk," he said. Sarah did not open the door. She spoke through it, her voice shaking. "I won't delete the video." He waited. Silence stretched. Then footsteps faded. Sarah slid down to the floor, her heart pounding, but she did not cry. She had seen something wrong, and she was not going to pretend she didn't. Meanwhile, Tom Nguyen sat in his cafe's back room transferring video files into a secure archive. He labeled them, time-stamped them, backed them up 3 different ways. He was not a lawyer. He was not an activist, but he understood survival. He had heard stories from his parents about what happens when truth is left in the hands of those who fear it. The next morning, Aisha opened her email. 8,000 messages. Some from strangers, some from former law students, some from people who had once stood where she stood, face down on pavement or handcuffed in confusion. She answered none of them. But she read them, every one of them. Not as praise, but as witness. Then, in the afternoon, the letter arrived, official, sealed, unmistakable. She opened it, reading slowly, line by line. The words were cold, administrative, impersonal, but their meaning cut deep. "You are assigned as presiding judge for case 2025 CR 1187. She read the defendant names: Ryan Mitchell, Kyle Benson. A silence filled the room, heavier than before, but not crushing, not anymore. Elena looked at her. "You can recuse yourself." Aisha closed the letter. No, that one word carried years of loss, years of work, years of being told to wait, to be patient, to let justice take the slow road. She was done waiting. "I will hear the case." Elena exhaled, not relieved, but steadier. "Then we prepare." outside. The city continued to pulse. Videos played on screens. Conversations grew louder. Signs were painted. Voices were raised. And the storm built, not wild, not uncontrolled, but inevitable. Aisha returned home that night and stood by the window, watching the lights flicker across the bay. Derek joined her, his hand resting softly on her shoulder. "This will change everything," he said. She nodded. "It already has." Far across the city, Mitchell lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the woman he had pinned to the ground was the one now holding his future in her hands. And no matter how he tried to justify it, the truth echoed in the dark. This wasn't a mistake. This was history repeating itself. And this time, history had a memory. The courtroom felt different that morning, not because of its walls or its height, but because of who walked through its doors. Aisha entered in her black judge's robe, steady, composed, every step deliberate, every breath measured. There was a hush as she took her seat, not silence, but a collective holding of breath, as if everyone understood that something larger than a trial was unfolding here. Mitchell sat at the defense table beside Benson, both in suits that did nothing to hide the tension in their bodies. Mitchell's jaw was clenched, the lines at the corners of his mouth deep, his eyes hollowed from too many sleepless nights. Benson kept his hands folded tightly, his fingers pale under the pressure, his gaze flickering like a man trying not to break. Their attorney, Mark Sullivan, stood quickly when Aisha addressed the court. He cleared his throat, a sharp, defensive sound. "Your Honor, I move to recuse the bench on grounds of conflict of interest." His voice tried to sound confident, but there was strain beneath it. Aisha looked at him calmly, her expression unreadable, motion denied. She said, the words were simple, but they landed with weight. Sullivan tried again. "Your Honor, with respect. The court has reviewed the conflict claim." Aisha interrupted, her tone steady but final. "The events in question are separate incidents involving separate legal claims. This court is capable of impartial judgment." Mitchell shifted. His breath caught. Benson lowered his head. The authority in her voice was not loud, not forceful. It was earned. The first witness was called. Jamal Hayes walked to the stand, wearing a simple dress shirt, sleeves rolled neatly, posture upright. He did not walk like a victim. He walked like a man who had learned to survive pain and remain standing. Aisha watched him with the restraint of a judge, but the memory of his case file flickered behind her eyes. Jamal had been stopped on a late evening months earlier, pulled over for a broken tail light. He had cooperated. He had spoken calmly. And yet the encounter ended with him on the pavement. Ribs fractured from a baton strike, blood on his shirt, while someone yelled at him to stop resisting. It was a story repeated across generations, across cities, across decades. Jamal looked at Mitchell and Benson, not with hatred, but with something far heavier, disappointment. "When they pulled me out of the car," he said, voice steady, "I asked what I had done. They didn't answer. They kept telling me to put my hands behind my back. I was already doing that. I wasn't fighting. I wasn't yelling. I was just there." He paused, and the courtroom felt it. "I remember someone calling me boy." A whisper moved through the gallery. Sullivan objected. Aisha overruled. "Continue," she said. Jamal nodded. "I don't remember much after the first strike. Just the pain, and the noise of it, the sound of something breaking." Benson's shoulders tightened. Mitchell stared down at the table. Dr. Marcus Lee testified next, setting down evidence like stones on a scale, baton DNA, blood pattern analysis, force impact estimates, every detail confirming excessive force. He did not dramatize. He did not moralize. He spoke with measured precision, the language of truth laid bare. Sullivan attempted to undermine him, but Marcus did not bend. "I have testified in federal and state courts for over 20 years, he said. "The physical evidence is consistent with a beating administered after compliance. There is no scientific basis to claim that the victim was resisting." Mitchell's breath caught. Benson closed his eyes. Then came the moment the courtroom did not expect. Linda Patel took the stand. She looked smaller than before, her clothes neat, her posture nervous, her eyes darting toward Sullivan for reassurance. She swore the oath, her voice barely audible. Sullivan questioned her gently, guiding her through her story. She repeated the lie, the same lie she had told police weeks earlier. She said she filed the anonymous tip because she believed she saw an active trafficker. She said it was coincidence, mistake, nothing personal, but lies tremble when pressed under the weight of truth. Elena stood for cross-examination, her voice calm, her hands resting lightly on the table. "Ms. Patel," she began, "do you remember where you were the day Judge Thompson ruled in the Patel v. Danvers property dispute?" Linda's face tightened. "Yes. You lost that case, correct?" "Yes," Linda said. "Too quickly. And your husband lost his appeal, correct?" Another pause. "Yes." Elena nodded, very slowly, letting the silence stretch. "Ms. Patel, did you or did you not tell a co-worker the following? That judge ruined my husband's career. One day she'll know what it feels like." The room went still. Linda froze. Her eyes flickered, the instinct to lie fighting the instinct to breathe. And then, from the back of the courtroom, Tom Nguyen stood. He held a small USB drive in his hand. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, respectful, but carrying something immovable beneath it. "I have video," Sullivan objected. The gallery stirred. Aisha raised a hand. "Approach." Tom stepped forward. He handed the drive to the bailiff. The bailiff plugged it in. The screen lit up. Footage from Tom's cafe. Not the arrest. Earlier. Weeks earlier. Linda sitting with a friend. Frustration etched in her every movement. Her voice on the recording was clear. She thinks she's untouchable, but everyone can break. Watch. When the video ended. Linda crumbled. Her shoulders shook. Her voice came out in pieces. I was angry. I wanted her to feel what I felt. I didn't think they would actually hurt her. I didn't think it would go that far. The courtroom was silent. Not shocked, not outraged, just still. The kind of stillness that comes when truth finally steps into the light. Aisha looked at the room, her voice soft, but resonant. "We will recess. Court will reconvene for further testimony and closing arguments." No one moved at first, because everyone understood. This was more than a trial now. This was reckoning, and the city was watching. The next morning, the courtroom was full before the doors even opened. Reporters lined the hallway, murmurs rippling through the gallery like distant thunder. But inside, at the center of it all, there was only the steady rhythm of breath, the quiet turning of pages, the calm authority of a judge who had spent her entire life preparing for moments like this. Aisha took her seat. She did not look at Mitchell. She did not look at Benson. Her eyes rested forward, on the truth waiting to be spoken. Jamal returned to the stand first. He sat straight, hands resting on his knees, voice steady but carrying the echo of something deeper. Pain. Yes, but dignity too. Elena asked him one more question. "Why did you choose to testify?" Jamal looked at the jury, then at the room itself. "Because I'm tired," he said. "Tired of seeing this happen. Tired of pretending it's normal. Tired of watching my students lose hope before they even get a chance to live. I'm here because if I don't stand now, they'll think we're supposed to just take it." The words settled softly, but they did not fade. Even Sullivan didn't interrupt. Then Marcus took the stand again. this time to explain how the baton impact matched the angle of force used when a person is already restrained. He spoke slowly, patiently, as though guiding the courtroom through each joint, each muscle, each bruise that told the story the officers claimed did not exist. Sullivan tried to shake him. He stood, palms pressed firmly against the table, projecting confidence that no longer had ground beneath it. Dr. Lee, isn't it true that force can be misinterpreted under stress? Officers must make quick decisions. Situations move fast. Couldn't this simply be a misjudgment? Marcus looked at him. Not hostile, not defensive, simply unwavering. A misjudgment lasts a second. He said, "This was sustained, repeated. Force after compliance is not fear, it's control, it's dominance, and it is unmistakable." Mitchell's jaw tightened. Benson's breathing grew short. The room held its breath. Then it was their turn. Sullivan called Officer Benson first. Benson stood slowly, his movements heavy, as though each step cost something. He took the oath, his voice barely above a whisper. When Sullivan asked him to explain the night of Jamal's arrest, Benson's words stumbled. I thought he was reaching for something. I thought we were in danger." But the words rang weak, empty, thin. They had been spoken too many times by too many mouths to mean anything anymore. Elena stood for cross-examination. Her tone was not sharp. It was quiet, and quiet was sharper than anger. "Officer Benson," she said, "were you under the influence of alcohol the night of the incident?" The room froze. Mitchell's head jerked toward Benson. Benson closed his eyes, and the truth came undone. "Yes," he whispered. The gallery gasped. Sullivan's face drained of color. Elena didn't push. She didn't need to. The silence did more than any question could. Benson continued, voice breaking. "I wasn't supposed to be on duty. I'd been drinking before the shift. I shouldn't have been there." His hands shook. His shoulders trembled. And when Mitchell got rough, I didn't stop him. I didn't step in. I just followed. He looked at Jamal then, and something inside him crumbled. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was not enough, but it was something." When Mitchell took the stand, it was different. His steps were stiff, shoulders high, pride holding him upright even as guilt threatened to drag him down. He sat, staring forward, jaw locked. Sullivan guided him gently at first. "Officer Mitchell, did you believe you were acting within your training?" Mitchell swallowed. A muscle in his neck pulsed. "Yes," he said. "I believed he was non-compliant. I believed he could be a threat." Elena approached. She did not carry notes. She did not need them. She stood still for a moment, letting the quiet settle. "Officer Mitchell," she said, her voice controlled. "What did Jamal say to you when you pulled him from the car?" Mitchell's fingers tightened around the edges of the witness stand. His voice came out strained. He said, "I'm not resisting." Aisha did not move, but something in her chest tightened. The room did not stir. Elena continued softly. "And what did you call him?" Mitchell's throat worked. His eyes flickered downward. He did not answer. The silence stretched until it hurt. Finally, the word left him, cracked at the edges. "Boy." A ripple of grief. Anger. Exhaustion moved through the courtroom like a pulse shared between strangers who knew the same wound. His voice broke then. It was not dramatic, not theatrical. It was quiet. A man realizing, too late, what he had become. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." He said, I thought I was in control. I thought I was doing my job." He looked at Jamal, then at Aisha, and his voice fell into something raw. "But I was wrong." Aisha breathed once, slow, steady. because this was the moment she had always understood would come. When harm acknowledged itself, when denial cracked open, when the truth finally stood without disguise. Linda sat in the back row, staring at her hands. Benson stared at the floor. Mitchell stared at no one. And the room, for the first time since the trial began, was completely silent. Aisha looked out over the courtroom, her voice quiet but unwavering. "This court will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments." The gavel struck once, and the echo stayed. That night, rain moved through the city like a long, low hymn, and Seattle breathed in a way that felt heavy, expectant, as if the whole place understood that judgment was no longer something distant or theoretical, but close, pressing, inevitable. Aisha sat alone in her living room, the lamp beside her casting a warm circle of light. Her robe folded neatly over the back of the chair. She stared at the case files, not because she needed to review them again, but because the weight of what tomorrow held rested on her shoulders in a way she could not share, not even with Derek. The law was clear. The evidence was clear. The harm was clear. But consequences were not simply sentences. They were ripples. Lives uprooted, families shattered, communities shifted, and despite everything that had been done to her, despite the humiliation, the bruises, the whispered insults, she did not want to become what had harmed her. Justice, she believed, must be clean, or it was not justice at all. Derek approached quietly, placing a cup of tea beside her. He did not speak. He only rested a hand on her shoulder, grounding her, reminding her she was not alone even when she must stand alone. She looked up at him and said the words she had kept inside all day. "Whatever I decide, I carry it forever." He nodded, because he knew the next morning. The courthouse steps overflowed with people, not chanting, not shouting, but singing. Reverend Olivia Grant led the hymn, her voice strong and full, the kind that could lift a weary heart without forcing it. "We shall overcome," they sang, not as a dream, but as a declaration. Journalists stood behind their cameras, capturing a city stirred awake. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. There was no longer the question of guilt. That truth had made itself known. Now the question was responsibility, accountability, the cost of harm. Sullivan gave his closing argument first. He tried to frame the officers as products of stress, of fear, of training environments that encouraged aggression. He spoke of mistakes, of pressures, of split-second decisions. His words were not entirely wrong, but they were not enough, because pain does not disappear simply because the person who caused it did not mean to. Elena stood slow, calm, steady, and when she spoke, it was not with anger, it was with clarity. "This is not about hatred," she said. "This is not about vengeance. This is about line after line, case after case, life after life, where power was used without care, without restraint, without accountability. This is about the harm of looking at someone and seeing danger instead of humanity. The law is not a shield for fear. The law is a mirror, and today, we look into it." She sat. The room did not move. Then something unexpected happened. A man in a dark suit approached the bench, accompanied by 2 agents. He introduced himself quietly as a representative from the FBI Office of Internal Affairs. His voice was low but steady. "Your Honor, we have conducted a review of the submitted body cam files. There is a 30-second deletion in Officer Mitchell's footage. The deletion was manual. A visible wave moved through the courtroom." Mitchell closed his eyes. He did not deny it. He did not fight. He simply lowered his head, because there was nothing left to hide behind. Benson stared at him. The betrayal sharp, but also familiar, hurt not only by the act, but by recognizing the part of himself that had allowed it. And that was when the moment came, the breaking point. Aisha looked at Mitchell, not as a victim, not as a judge, but as a human being who had seen too much suffering to confuse punishment with healing. "Stand," she said. Mitchell stood slowly, his legs unsteady. The room held its breath. "You had power," Aisha said, her voice soft, not raised, not dramatic, but strong enough to fill the room entirely. "And you chose fear." Mitchell's eyes glistened. He did not wipe them. He did not look away. "Because there was no place left to run," Aisha continued. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear decide who you become. You forgot that, and others were harmed because of it." Benson looked at the floor, his shoulders shaking. Aisha looked at him next. "And you followed, not because you believed, but because you did not want to stand alone. That is its own kind of choice, and its own kind of harm." Benson let out a breath that sounded like surrender. A quiet one. A human one. The courtroom did not explode. It did not roar. It simply breathed. Deep and slow. Understanding. Because accountability is not always loud. Sometimes it is the smallest sound in the world. Aisha adjourned the court for deliberation. She stepped out into her chambers, closing the door behind her, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to sit, to feel, to be. She did not cry. She did not break. She simply existed. The weight was still there. It would always be there. But there was something else too. A steadiness. A truth. A knowledge that the hardest part was not deciding guilt. It was deciding what justice should look like when everyone in the room was already broken. Outside. The voices continued singing, not for victory, but for hope. And hope, Aisha realized, was its own verdict. The courtroom was completely silent when Aisha returned to the bench. Not the kind of silence that waits for something to happen, but the kind that knows something irreversible is about to occur. Mitchell and Benson stood, their lawyers beside them, but their defenses were already gone. Jamal sat in the first row, hands folded, back straight, not triumphant, not vengeful, just present, holding space for the version of himself who had once lain on the pavement. Ribs broken, dignity stripped away. Aisha lifted the verdict document. Though she already knew every word, her voice did not tremble. It didn't rise. It didn't fall. It simply was. Steady and clear. This court has reached a determination. Every person leaned forward just slightly, as though pulled by an invisible thread, regarding the charge of excessive force. She continued. "The defendants, Officers Ryan Mitchell and Kyle Benson, are found guilty." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They carried weight because truth, once spoken aloud, cannot be pushed back into silence. Mitchell lowered his head. Benson exhaled a long breath, his shoulders folding inward, the last of his denial falling away like a shed skin. Aisha continued, her tone measured. "This ruling is not a condemnation of law enforcement as an institution. It is a condemnation of actions, choices, harm caused under the color of authority." She paused. Not for effect, but for honesty. Power does not excuse harm. Duty does not erase responsibility. And justice cannot turn a blind eye to suffering simply because suffering has become familiar. A wave of emotion moved through the gallery, though no one spoke. "Officer Benson," she said, turning her eyes to him first. "You have admitted to being under the influence of alcohol during the incident. Your judgment was impaired, your control absent, and your willingness to intervene compromised. You will face termination from duty, and this court sentences you to 2 years in a monitored rehabilitation and accountability program, followed by community service within youth restorative outreach." Benson nodded, tears slipping down his face. Not defended. Not hidden. He was broken open. but for the first time in his career, maybe for the first time in his life, he was honest. Then Aisha turned to Mitchell. He did not look up, but his breath was shallow, his jaw tight, his hands trembling even as he tried to keep them still. "Officer Mitchell," she said, "your actions were not impulsive. They were intentional." The room felt the shift, heavy, but not cruel. You exercised force not out of necessity, but out of presumption. You believed the worst of the person in front of you before she ever spoke. You deleted evidence to avoid accountability, and your decisions have caused measurable harm. Mitchell's eyes slowly lifted, and when they met Aisha's, there was no defiance, only exhaustion, only recognition. This court sentences you to 2 years in state custody, termination of employment, and a mandatory ethics rehabilitation program to begin upon release. Furthermore, financial restitution in the amount of $500,000 will be awarded to the victim, Mr. Hayes. A whisper of reaction rose from the gallery, but faded quickly, because this was not a moment of celebration. It was a moment of reckoning. Sullivan sagged in his chair, his career unraveling even before the final blow. But it came. Aisha looked toward him. "Regarding defense counsel Mark Sullivan," she said, "this court refers your conduct during the suppression hearing to the Bar Association, intentional obstruction, evidence misrepresentation, and coercion of witness testimony cannot be overlooked." Sullivan closed his eyes, already knowing what it meant. Disbarment, career over. Not because the system targeted him, but because the system had finally turned the mirror on him, and then, in the final turn of the wheel. Aisha addressed the courtroom at large, not as judge, not as victim, but as a woman who had carried scars long before this trial ever began. "Justice," she said quietly, "is not about punishment. It is about correction. It is about choosing, every day, to build something better than what harmed us." No one applauded, no one shouted, no one cheered. They simply absorbed the words and held them. Because some truths were not meant to incite noise, they were meant to settle deep and stay. When court adjourned, the gallery rose, not for tradition, not for ritual, but out of respect, not for the robe, but for the woman who wore it. Outside, protesters chanted, not in anger, but in unity. News outlets reported sweeping aftermaths, 300 precincts, statewide initiated policy review, training standards overhauled, civilian complaint boards established, settlements negotiated reaching $25,000 in interim restitution. Benson entered rehab quietly. He did not disappear. He began, slowly, painfully, rebuilding. Mitchell's home was foreclosed. His wife filed separation papers. His children stopped returning his calls. Some tragedies were not loud. They simply grew in the empty spaces of the life left behind. Linda Patel was sentenced to 6 months in county jail for filing a false report and perjury. She cried through the entire sentencing, not because of the time, but because of the realization that jealousy had cost her everything. And yet, even through all this, Aisha did not feel triumph. She did not feel victory. She felt the weight of judgment carried forward. She returned home that evening, hung her robe gently in its place, and sat at her window. Seattle glowed in the rain. Derek stood beside her quietly. She leaned her head against his shoulder. No words were needed. Justice had been delivered, but justice always leaves echoes, and hers would not fade soon. The months that followed did not arrive all at once, but unfolded slowly, like dawn breaking through a long night. The city did not change overnight, and Aisha never expected it to. But something had shifted in the air, something subtle, yet undeniable. People spoke differently now. They watched differently. They listened. Not everyone, not always, but enough to matter. Aisha found herself invited to speak at universities, Panels, community centers, not as a symbol, not as a victim, not as a hero, but simply as a voice that had walked through fire and come out the other side without letting it burn away her compassion. She accepted some invitations and declined others, choosing carefully where her voice mattered and where it would merely be consumed. At a civic integrity conference downtown, she stood before a crowd of professionals, activists, students, and elders. The room was full, but silent, waiting. When she spoke, her tone was steady, but warmer now, as if something inside her had softened just enough to let the world in. Justice, she said, is not about revenge. It is not about humiliation or defeat. Justice is correction. It is a process of acknowledging harm, confronting truth, and rebuilding what was broken. The room listened, not because her title demanded it, but because her experience gave her words weight. We must build systems that do not depend on whether a person in power chooses to be good. She continued, we must build systems that protect the vulnerable whether the powerful are good or not. She paused, letting the truth settle. Otherwise, justice is only mercy disguised as luck. When she finished, the audience did not erupt into applause. They stood in quiet respect, a different kind of acknowledgement, one born not from excitement, but from recognition. Meanwhile, Jamal had begun something new of his own, with settlement money, donations, and volunteer support. He founded a youth legal empowerment program in South Seattle. He taught teenagers how to speak to officers, how to record safely, how to assert rights without escalating fear. But more than that, he taught them to understand their worth before the world tried to define it for them. His students admired him not because he had been hurt, but because he had refused to let that harm define who he became. Reverend Olivia Grant continued her work too, organizing community circles, restorative justice meetings, victim support gatherings, spaces where pain could be spoken without shame. From citywide fundraising and partnership outreach, she helped establish a $1 million fund for victims of police misconduct and wrongful arrests. Not a symbolic gesture, but a lasting resource. Aisha did not attend every event, every march, every gathering. She knew that justice was not carried by one person, not even by one story. It was carried by many hands, many hearts, many steady voices, and hers was only one among them. At home, life settled into quiet rhythms. She read in the evenings again. She cooked dinner with Derek. She met Elena for coffee, their laughter softer now, less sharp with urgency. But the past did not disappear. Some nights, Aisha would stand by the window, watching the lights reflect off Elliott Bay, and remember the sound of gravel under her cheek when she was pinned to the ground. The memory did not haunt her. It simply lived alongside her, as something true, something she had survived. One afternoon, months after the verdict, she received a message inviting her to a private forum on judicial reform. She recognized many names on the list, some progressive, some resistant, some powerful enough to shape national policy. As she prepared her remarks, she thought about her father, his hands rough, his voice gentle, the way he had looked at her after the incident so many years ago, not with pity, but with a quiet kind of knowing. His lesson had never been bitterness. It had been endurance, and endurance had brought her here. On the evening of the event, Aisha took the stage, looked out at a room full of decision-makers, legislators, and civic leaders, and began with the words she had waited her entire life to say. The law must learn from the pain it has caused. The room did not shift. No stunned reactions, no dramatic gasps, just listening, genuine listening. And she knew, in that moment, that change was slow, but not impossible. After the conference, She returned home to an apartment filled with warm lamplight and the faint scent of Derek's cooking. She slipped off her shoes, set down her notes, and exhaled a long, full breath. Derek came to meet her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. No words, only presence, only peace. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel tired, truly tired. She showered, changed, and sat at her desk to clear a few emails before bed. Routine, ordinary, the kind of simple quiet her life had once taken for granted. And then she saw it. A new message. No subject line, no sender name, just one line of text inside. This was only the beginning. LP. She sat very still, staring at the screen. Not afraid, not startled, just thoughtful, calm. Linda Patel was in jail, but Linda Patel had not acted alone, and Aisha knew it. Someone had whispered in her ear, someone had encouraged, someone had fed the resentment until it became action. Aisha closed the laptop slowly. She walked to the window. Outside, the city glowed in soft, distant light, rain misting the glass. The shadows in the streets were long, but shadows are only cast where light already exists. The fight continues, she whispered, not in exhaustion, not in despair, in purpose, in resolve. The night stretched across the city like a curtain. Aisha stood tall, quiet, steady. The story was not over. It had only just begun. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, please subscribe and leave a like to support the channel. Your support helps these stories reach more people. Thank you, and take care.